Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to the minigame podcast. Today is Wednesday, June 11th. We'll do about an hour of warm-up and then we will jump into video game news. Yu-Gi-Oh! Still doing its own thing. Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel has managed to stick around for the long haul past your average 3 years, which is not super surprising considering it has such a big name behind it, but there is also a lack of interest for me specifically in playing it. Yeah, honestly, I don't know why I didn't wise up faster, and we'll be scrolling down the 24-hour peak concurrent SteamDB chart here. Yeah, I don't know why I didn't wise up faster and realize it just was taking way too much time to play Yu-Gi-Oh! I guess at the beginning I was actually enjoying it, but having already spent years playing Hearthstone and then playing a little bit of Magic the Gathering Arena and then playing Shadowverse for a while, I had done probably a lifetime's worth of collectible card gaming for me, which inherently I guess it is not my number one hobby. It's probably not even in the top 5 hobbies that I would want to engage with, particularly since I am such a single player and playing online on something like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is just playing with random people. It isn't that same social experience that you might get with a good group of friends, although you certainly aren't guaranteed that. It's kind of interesting to see Magic the Gathering Arena even in a top 100 chart. Is it actually somehow gaining some fandom? Maybe. I mean, it is close to its all-time peak. Did they just come out with a mobile app, I guess? Wow. We'll have to investigate that, because either Magic the Gathering Arena has had a mobile app and I just ignored it, or this is new news to me. Maybe relatively new news in general. So yeah, I've been feeling a little bit better in most cases, although I still have a feeling of dread that everything is going to come falling apart, which I think most people have that, but yeah. I really feel like I've been shedding a lot of money lately, having just bought a new mattress extra. And yeah, that's how it goes. You have a almost bipolar like manic episode where it's like, oh, slick deal sales, I want to get this, I want to buy this. Switch 2s, even though I didn't buy a Switch 2, certainly probably had some influence there. And then you have the depressive episodes afterwards. It's like, oh man, I blew the budget on this, I really didn't need to buy that. Although in the case of the mattress, I absolutely didn't need to buy it. I needed to buy it probably 3 years ago, and I have just managed to put it off, perhaps to the greater loss of my own personal health. But yeah, I've been feeling a little bit better. I've been a little bit more active in far as getting back to cleaning and decluttering. One of the projects I was going to have happen was painting a hallway. I have now found out that the previous owner of my house painted the hallway with latex paint, which is something apparently you would only do in bathrooms and kitchens. And so because it's latex paint, nothing is going to stick to it, so you cannot just paint over it. And I assume that also means you cannot put mud over it, because there's several spots that need like mud and taping, and so it seems like I'm going to have to hire somebody not only to paint, which I was going to do anyways, but to first probably sand, if not strip in some other way, all of the latex paint off just to get it painted, which at a certain level, if it was just an ugly paint job and there weren't other problems with holes in it, that might be the it wouldn't be really worth doing. And the only other option I could see is making it, since it's a hallway, even smaller and more narrow by putting paneling over it, or maybe putting a very thin second layer of drywall and thickening up the walls that way, or maybe you could do something fancy with cloth. But yeah, I think all of those get a little too artsy fartsy, and it doesn't really make it any cheaper. It's not, I don't think there's a real do-it-yourself solution. Heck, there might even be an argument to just tearing the walls down bare and starting over from scratch, ripping out all the plasterboard behind it. But I don't think that's really the solution. So yeah, one of my desired projects, once again, is being stymied more than I would like. I am still working on my wishlist cleanup, which has stymied a new thought I had. Right now I have the tabs for Steam pages self-curating, so that if it has something that might have adult content on it, or is tagged as having sexual content or nudity in it, it'll just go back to the front page, the main page of Steam. But because that's all happening in JavaScript as the pages load in the background for Firefox, it's not adding to the history of that tab that is happening, so you can't click back and go back to the page, so you don't really have an idea of what the game actually was that was being blocked or curated by my code. So what I want to do is do like one of those pop-ups that everybody hates, but in this case is actually going to be useful, that would blur the background and then have the reason it's blurred, which that might be the most difficult thing. I'll have to rewrite the code a little bit to do that, because it's going to have to test for all four things. And then it's going to have a check button that you click, and when you click the button it will unblur it. And so it will just be a one-time thing that will happen instantaneously, and it won't be moving the pages anywhere. And so that's what I started to work on, but because it requires a little bit of custom style sheet CSS manipulation, which I can do with one of my plugins that lets me edit and CSS override a page on the internet, where the other plugin lets me put JavaScript into it. With those two plugins combined, I can effectively do almost anything to a page on the internet to make it look the way I want it to look, which is amazing that you can do that, and a great aspect of the internet that it was just created in a time before being locked down was really a thing. But yeah, every time I try to change the CSS, it reloads every single Steam page that's open. So I had already run my macros today. They ran very fastly, and I believe we're going to find that they ran perfectly today, with the small exception of not opening the follow list, which I think I figured out why the follow list news didn't open, and have fixed that. Now today really is not going to be like last stream. There's no more Summer Game Fest announcements really to follow up on or anything like that. The biggest news today, I think, is probably just 1 week in with the Switch 2 and a lack of continued hype around that, because how can you be very hyped around a very expensive iteration of the Switch 1 that has one game effectively worth owning? But yeah, I looked it up, and like Mario Kart 8 is about 8 gigabytes in space. So if you were to have a Mario Kart Switch Ripper and you would take the cartridge and rip your copy of your legally purchased Switch cartridge, and as it would be making a backup there, and then if you were to run it on some kind of emulator on, say, the Steam Deck, which if you have a 256 gigabyte hard drive on the Steam Deck, let's say you have 200 gigabytes there, that's a lot of copies of Mario Kart 8 you could play at 8 gigabytes each. Yeah, 160 copies. So it really is to the point where if you were to roughly guesstimate, 200 to maybe 300 at most gigabytes are needed for the entirety of the Nintendo Switch library. That's every bad game, every language version of a game that you might not care about playing or be able to play. A curated experience would be much smaller. And it gets only smaller when you start to talk about Sega Genesis games. In contrast, like if we go back many generations, those games are much smaller. Frankly, even Wii games smaller, because the vast majority of games code is not going to change in much size. Like the actual executable around the game's code, it's going to be a few megabytes, maybe 100 megabytes at most, and even that would be kind of large. It is just the quality and the amount of audio and the quality and the amount of video, or textures to render video, or shaders to render video. So with a 1 terabyte Steam Deck, which I'm hearing rumors from another YouTuber that Steam Decks are getting hard to purchase now in the United States, probably because of the tariffs. But a 1 terabyte Steam Deck would have more than enough space to have every single video game that came out on a major console, and every single video game, I guess, that came out on any console, really, with space to spare, as long as you only go up to perhaps PlayStation 3 era and Nintendo Wii U era. Yeah, it might be a bit of a tight squeeze, and that's just like every single one. If you're just hoarding, a more curated experience, more realistic experience is really getting to the point where all that data could be archived for historical purposes very easily. And getting to my point on this, it's a shame that the Library of Congress is not doing that, as far as I know. Like, last I checked, the United States Library of Congress, and as far as I know, no other library of any other country, is actively trying to keep backups of old games. Which, the reason I'm thinking of this is because as I'm going through my wish list, there's a lot of games that are just no longer listed. Clearly there was a point, and I don't know if it's corrected now, where people were making demos as their own separate game, and so it had this own separate Steam page that really didn't connect to the main games page. So there's a lot of things on my wish list as I'm looking at them that are free, and then I do a little bit more investigation and realize, oh no, it's free, but it's only the first chapter of a larger game, and then the larger game is mixed reviewed where the demo is rated positively, which doesn't really help you much as far as having two separate store pages that you might very easily never see both. there's also just a lot of games that are delisted for one reason or another. And I can almost understand it in some aspects, that if you came out with a game, and even if it was received well, but then you have no ability or no intention on making another game, why leave that first game on Steam, particularly if it's a free game, if you're not going to make any money off of it? Even though I think Steam is doing the hosting service, you still have to do accounting and file taxes and things like that if you're running a business. Where if you really just want to shut down the business, which probably happens a lot, delisting the game from Steam makes a lot of sense. But yeah, don't let me lead you astray either. While I've found a ton of games that have been delisted on my wish list that I might have wanted to play, none of them are very important games or well-known games, and it is really just no big loss in the long run. I still have thousands and thousands of games on my wish list. You know, if we see Magic the Gathering Arena on Steam, it's only 62.67% popular, and I'm surprised it's even that high considering all the nonsense that Magic the Gathering has been up to. I want to find its Steam page. I think there's a link higher up here. Here it is, store page. But yeah, it's mixed. Yeah, the biggest complaint is some kind of Final Fantasy crossover happening right now. Maybe that's why it's got such a big thing. Yeah, June 10th, Final Fantasy. That's why people are playing it. Yeah, I think most of the complaint really around Magic the Gathering Arena has to do more with the fact of how Magic the Gathering, the card game, is doing. More than how much the actual digital part of it is doing. I'm still occasionally watching some episodes of Ranma 1/2, which there's a couple of interesting things for such an old anime, joke anime. It's kind of amazing how much it is interested in karate and how much it looks to China to be this mystical land. So basically the Japanese characters in Ranma 1/2 look to the China as being this like mystical magical land that's more ancient, and it's an interesting aspect from an American's perspective as we look to Japan as being this mystical ancient land more. I think a lot of that has to do with the timing of the release. I wouldn't be surprised if Ranma 1/2, at least in its original iteration, was during a time in which maybe Japan was still secretly running mainland China, or they just had pretty good relationships. It would be very impossible for a show like that to be made today, as there's just I think, major amount of animosity between the Japanese and the Chinese for probably very good reason. Yeah. I'm confused here. I'm not seeing a platform. Here it is. It says iOS and Android. When did it come out on iOS and Android? Hmm. 2020 was when it came out on Mac OS. Oh, by the way, Marvel Snap, speaking of other kind of like a card games, okay. Early access version for Android was in 2021, so nearly 4 years ago. Interesting, I've just forgotten about it, I guess. And stable version. But yeah, Marvel Snap has a new storefront that I saw them post out on Twitter when I was just going down Twitter, wondering why I even still have that tab open. And yeah, there's just no enthusiasm in which anybody would actually report on that at all. And there's, as far as I can tell, no enthusiasm at all for Marvel Snap. That short 3-minute game cycle concept was just a failure, in my opinion, which is a sad statement, but this might be one of those rare situations where 3 minutes is too short. Obviously, a 40-minute game of Magic the Gathering or a 40-minute or longer game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is too long, but there has to be something in the middle that's better. I think Pokemon TCG Pocket's speedier version of Pokemon is probably closer to the right speed for modern gamers. Not that I think Pokemon TCG Pocket is particularly the best, a good game even, really. And certainly they're not really interested in people actually playing the game. They are just interested in getting microtransactions for what is effectively a gacha game around Pokemon card games. Pokemon cards. But yeah, there's definitely a need for me to get rid of Pokemon TCG Pocket out of my gameplay loop. I'm still trying to play Memento Mori, but I'm not having extra time to go back and try and really grind in that. And if I could really grind in it, I might get a little bit further. I think I'm probably on the cusp of a small bump up in my position for a game that moves so slowly. Whereas I'm not playing ranked at all in Pokemon TCG Pocket, so the fact that I'm not playing ranked means I'm not really grinding at all. I'm barely having enough time to do just the new single player content that they're throwing in, which I guess with the limited events single player content and just the massive amount of single player content there is now, it would probably be a severely overwhelming experience for somebody to jump in with a new account of Pokemon TCG Pocket at the moment, particularly if they were going to try and go back and get all the old cards. Now the good news is I think for the most part, with maybe the exception of some promo cards, you could go back and grind and get all the old cards, or you certainly could pay, I think, to get most of the old cards and not grind. Yeah, I'm still actually trying to follow the story of Magic Emotica. But yeah, I do think as soon as that new Shift Up game gets released, assuming it is even a mobile game, that is going to start to be my focus. Assuming it is even a game as a service game. It might be a single player one and done game. Like, come to think of it, Stellar Blade is definitely a single player one and done game. But yeah, as far as collecting articles in the past couple days, it only went back 2 pages on Video Games Chronicles. This is leftovers from my macros. I still haven't let it close these tabs after it's done, just for an abundance of safety. Whereas it was 4 entire pages of news in just because of the Summer Games Fuss previously. And then same is true for Gamatsu for the most part. 3 pages is how far it's gone back over the past 3 days, whereas I think it may have been 4 or 5 pages. And then I think I pretty much have it programmed to not go back any pages at all on Gaming on Linux, but maybe it is programmed to go back at least 1 page. This is 2 pages here that it's gone back to, I guess. But yeah, all of this news here, if it is in chronological order, is stuff we've already talked about. And then, like, GameDeveloper.com only goes back 1 page because it makes so few articles that 1 page often is a month's worth of posting or more. And then, as far as how far back it scrolled on the Steam listings, seems to have really just been a couple days, June 10th or so. See, this is the news thing, and I think the problem with my macro and why it didn't work is because I don't have a middle step program to actually collect these article links for some reason. But yeah, I have put some games back on my follow list, but I am now in this weird situation where there probably is too few games on the follow list, and there's a lot of games now that have just been checkboxed that I need to rethink as far as what I want to go back and yeah, just kind of rethink what I want to go back and put on the follow list and actually want to give a thought to. Because now that I've cleaned up the follow list, which didn't take me as long as I would have thought, this Honkai Impact 3rd being on the follow list is going to be something that just has announcements all the time. Yeah, I now just have a problem of the checkboxes. And yeah, we don't really need to scroll down the gacha sales every single stream, so I'm trying to save time here. Like I said, I'm still playing Madoka Magica, etc. and Pokemon Pocket TCG and Memento Mori. And new mobile games don't really come out that often anyways. And this is just like our best guess as far as what is somewhat popular as far as mobile gaming goes, which may not really even matter. It is interesting how we've had to reframe phrases too, where mobile gaming means cell phone, whereas handheld gaming means Switch and Steam Deck and RGLIX. I don't know if I mentioned it, but by getting new mattress, it said I have to wait 3 days before to allow it to fully inflate. And the mattress was really heavy. I had to actually call or ask my neighbor to come help me unbox it. I could not get a grip on the box and lift it. Fortunately, I bought a really cheap workshop type carpet from Home Depot, so I put that on the floor and it was brand new. So, and frankly, I think the mattress is still laying on some plastic anyways, so that but yeah, this mattress is a hybrid mattress with metal springs in it on top of having layers of foam, so there is I guess more weight to it because of that compared to my current mattress, which is just all foam. But yeah, there is certainly a question as far as what I am going to do with my old mattress, but at the moment, just as a temporary way of getting it done, I have a vacuum bag that I'm going to just try and vacuum it down and shrink it down. And even that vacuum bag, as long as I don't ruin it and tear it, would be useful later, because I have, frankly, I have like 2 full-size mattresses that I could put together in the vacuum bag and vacuum down if I got rid of the queen size, the old queen size mattress, which it does make a lot of sense to get rid of it. My chart here is still completely broken and I'm not planning on working on that anytime soon. I'm still struggling to get my macros to run, to schedule videos. That needs some more work, and I have not done anything to schedule any pre-recorded footage, which I really wanted to have going by now. And yeah, I think June might be the move, but inherently I need to schedule videos, because if I could actually get some watch time, then I might get in the YouTube Partner Program. I might actually have some income. That might solve a lot of problems. Probably not, because that's going to be a minimal amount of income, almost certainly, but it might help. And any little bit helps. Anything that might just even counter my shoppiness, my overspending, might help a little bit. I'm still playing Magic Hat, but I'm in a weird spot with Magic Hat in that you effectively need a stock of lives to do each of the levels in World 7, and so it needs to be a fairly high amount of lives, somewhere around 150 or more. And so to get any kind of stock of lives, you're going to have to go back and play something. And the real encouragement is to go back to like World 1 and run it through all the time attack modes, which doesn't give you a lot of lives. You get like 3 lives for doing a time attack on one of the levels, and there's only 9 levels, so 27 lives is not much to run through the game a second time. On top of which, you might very well want to get the gems and the items in the game, although it's questionable if you really need all the items at all. But that doesn't give you a lot of lives either. Like, maybe a level will give you 8 lives in World 1 for going through it and going through it while you're getting the gems. So you are in this weird situation where I probably need to go straight to just like World 5 and defeat a level that is more difficult to get more lives. But the game certainly is not encouraging that, because it's an achievement for doing all the time attacks and then an achievement for getting all the gems. And there's a true ending, and I don't know what really unlocks the true ending, but it all really is adding up to the idea of playing the game a second time when it felt like you were almost going to beat the game. And I could see the game really dragging out. And it definitely feels like time attack is kind of pointless, because it's just giving you a time score, and it doesn't seem like it's giving you anything else other than a few lives. And it doesn't seem like you really need to collect all the gems unless that unlocks the true ending. There is, in each of the pawns, a rainbow shard, and to get all the rainbow shards, I think you are going to have to unlock half of all of the items that are available, at least, just to unlock abilities. But once you've spent the time to unlock all these abilities, they're probably not going to be super helpful. And see, I think that's the weird situation, is that as you're grinding and playing the game a second time, you may just get to the credits anyways. And the number of players who made it very near to the end or near the end of the game are below 5%, as you can see with this achievement. Although that number might be fairly low, because the game may just have not had achievements for the majority of the time that it was available on Steam, which that obviously skews the results. If most people got the game on day one and achievements were not unlocked, and then they beat the game before achievements were unlocked, then yeah, that definitely would skew the results quite a bit. But that's all I've been playing. Mostly I still think Magic Hat is fine. I definitely thought from the first second I started recording that there was a chance that as I got towards the end of the game it was going to get really hard, and it has. And the question is it just going to become rage quit inducing hard, or can I just grind it out? And I definitely have a lot of opportunity to run around the entire game and play it a second time to grind it out. And this is playing it a second time while still not starting a new game plus, so really there's almost a desire by the creator of Magi Cat for you to get extremely good at the game and just play it over and over again. But it doesn't seem like it really has enough content there and enough innovation there. It is heavily inspired by Super Mario World, but it definitely is in a lesser league than Super Mario World. And Super Mario World certainly didn't have enough in it to encourage people to play it 4 or 5 times. People just did play it because they had no other options. So yeah, you can also see my follow list has 35 games on it. I'm not going to bother to show it. And my wish list is getting slightly smaller, but it still probably will be in the 5,000s once I've done the full cleanup. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Part of the reason why me trying to adjust the CSS with all the tabs open became a real big problem is that it wants all that processing to happen at once and uses a ton of RAM because it's loading all of the tabs open. So you can see when I just closed the previous tab, there was a little bit of a delay there because, yeah, my computer's being a little sluggish now after I did that. And weirdly, there's just kind of nothing to say as far as any of the announcements or anything. And that's a problem, I think, majorly because it is just teaser trailers that you get and names of games and maybe a general idea of a release date. But yeah, you don't, in the Summer Game Fest in particular, see a lot of games that are saying we've got it perfectly locked down and we're going to release this game on December 1st. You get a lot more of just generic promises and loose promises. A couple of games that caught my attention, but I'm probably also just looking. See, in a weird way, this might also be a case where Stellar Blade is just perhaps the biggest game this week, and mainstream video game journalism once again just does not want to discuss Stellar Blade, which is believable. We can see the Steam Deck is falling down on the top sales, so there might be an availability issue there, or it might just be because of the Switch 2, or it might be because there's just an anticipation of something better than the Switch 2. I heard one podcast, a couple of YouTuber people, talking about the thought that now that there are tariffs and building hardware is a little bit more difficult, maybe Valve will just give up and throw up their hands and quit. I mean, at a certain level, they could claim victory and say, well, they forced Microsoft to think about making a better handheld experience, and so they don't need to make the Steam Deck anymore. I think that would be some grade A BS if they made that argument. And see, this is the trending free, and here you have an example of a free game that is an MMORPG, but the rest of these are slashed with the demo banner. That's another thing I'm removing from my wish list, is a lot of games are labeled free but then have in-app purchases, and it's fairly obvious that the in-app purchases on those specific games are going to be so necessary that the game actually isn't free. And usually that's games that are basically just mobile games that happen to also have been ported to Steam. Yep. So, what is Idle Waters? It's a fishing screensaver thing. So it's kind of a idle fishing game that runs on your desktop while you're doing other things. Yeah, that doesn't particularly interest me, but okay. And I can't look at Stellar Blade because clicking on Stellar Blade will have my curation move it back to the main page. Why? Because it is tagged with sexual content here. So before it moves forward, we'll see that it is overwhelmingly positive, 98%. In fact, it might very well be, if it continues to get reviews, the highest rated game on Steam. But nobody's going to make a big deal with it having less than 1,000 reviews and being 98% positive. Yeah, and it's going to get harder and harder to maintain high positive ratings. But yeah, it might be the biggest deal. I will show, scrolling down here, how far I got. So eventually this will be the pop-up. It'll say Steam page blurred for X instead of doing that. and then there will be a button that will just say show and it will click. But it'll be adjusted so it will blur the background and be centered in the middle of the screen at the very top of a page. And so I haven't made it particularly far into the process yet. But yeah, that will be a much better system than just having a bunch of games that are on the front page, and in this case I can click back because I manually opened the tab, but when my macros open the tabs I can't. Seeds of Calamity. The early access farming sim. Being rated very positively. So one of the things I haven't done yet, and I need to think about, is what is the criteria going to be for me to see a game and put it on the follow list. Obviously, in general, I know the criteria is things on the follow list need to be games I actually want to play, and this looks like a Stardew Valley game, so it's not really one I want to play. But do I need to really hold back and wait to see if it has at least 30 reviews that are mostly positive before I even put something on the follow list? Probably. I probably need to apply every rule that I was applying to games on the follow list, add it to the wish list. Just shift that down to checkmark things now instead. And so yeah, a game like this might qualify as far as going on the follow list, but I don't know. Inherently it's going to come down to how important is my follow list. Am I showing my follow list to other people? Is it kind of a shared follow list as far as here's are games I think other people might like? Since I did buy a Steam Deck for someone else now, I'm gonna think about, hey, maybe I'll have that kind of dialogue and curate some new games for them. Maybe I won't, probably I won't, but yeah, there are some co-op games on the follow list right now that probably I'm not gonna play co-op with the other person, but they may want to play co-op with other people, whereas I want to make YouTube content, and so I probably wouldn't do that. This is a weird 3D mouse game with some... This isn't Sudoku, this is not Pictocross either. It's what is it called when it's just number cross? See if they say. Cracking the Cryptic has put out some more puzzles. Nonograms. But yeah, nonograms might be more my style than starting with Cracking the Cryptic things. Apparently I had already seen this. Or, why is this checkmarked? Did I just do that? I'm gonna put that on the follow list and think about it, but yeah, there's almost no reason to even put it on the follow list. It seems almost like it would make sense to jump directly to the wish list in this case. One of the things I'm also doing to clean up my wish list is I'm adding a bunch of student projects just to my library, so my library is getting bigger and bigger. Which is no big problem there. It's probably a wise thing to take anything that's a free student project and just go ahead and put it in my account. That way it doesn't disappear. Although I don't think student projects are really going to disappear, because it's usually a university that publishes those onto Steam, and they're using that kind of as their own self-promotion. But I could certainly see small independent games disappearing. And you probably wouldn't be too shocked to recognize that EA is probably the worst AAA publisher out there. of having a habit of games being delisted, although a lot of times it might just be games are getting delisted because they're being bundled into better versions of the games, although a lot of times those better versions are not actually better versions. As far as I can tell, this page doesn't look too different, but it is different. There's an estimated return of stock in summer of 2025. I have been looking at the listings for Steam Decks fairly consistently every stream. This is the first time I've ever heard or seen out of stock. Now, refurb stock has been out of stock quite a bit, and we'll look at that in a second. Still, for $400 you could get the 256 LCD, which, yeah, honestly I think the difference between the LCD version and the OLED version is less significant, I guess might be the best word to say, than the difference between the Switch 1 and the Switch 2, because Switch 2 games can only be played on a Switch 2, whereas Steam Deck games that can be played on an LCD can also be played on the OLED, and vice versa. Anything on the OLED can be played on the LCD. It's just really a little bit better battery life and an OLED screen as far as the improvements, and a bit bigger of a screen as far as the LED goes. Wi-Fi 6E is not really going to matter. I'd forgotten it even had that 90 Hz refresh rate. It's probably not something you're even going to be able to enjoy much. So if you need to compromise and can't get it refurbed, buying the 256 LCD new is fine. We can see that the 1 terabyte OLED is also out of stock. Estimated. Says Steam Deck OLED 512 and 1 terabyte models are temporarily out of stock in the US and Canada as we adapt to the recent supply chain constraints. We anticipate being back in stock by the end of summer and currently expect prices will remain the same. We'll update you as soon as we have more clarity on what the timeline ultimately looks like. Which, yes, it doesn't really feel like the Steam Deck is being affected by tariffs to the point where they're gonna change the prices, but they're being affected by supply chain restrictions. And yes, Donald Trump tweeted earlier today to say that some kind of negotiations had been agreed upon, at least for the most part, between China and the United States. So it may be all the tariff talk is going to, for the most part, be over with for a while. And inflation only went up a little bit. I think it was 0.1% by whoever estimates how much it goes up. So there was some shockingly good news there too. I still really question about getting the Steam Deck dock though. That still just feels like that's not the best deal. And coming as no surprise, none of the refurbs are in stock at the moment. I'm trying to think if there is a component specifically that would be hard to supply, and I just don't think there really is. It's not opening up when I'm clicking on it. Which is to say, I think all the components might be equally difficult to get a handle on if there's supply chain constraints and or tariff problems. And see, this might very well be a case in which Valve is being challenged, as we all are being challenged, to do a second design of the Steam Deck OLED as far as how is it built internally, as far as a middle step to say, hey, we're going to use the same components, but we're going to try and remove as many ribbon tape connectors as possible and have a new motherboard that is something that makes a little bit more financial sense. Reduce a resistor here or a screw there, things like that. Although it may very well be the case that all these ribbon cables and separate boards make sense. They don't make a lot of sense to me, though. As I would see it, you would want almost all the components either on one motherboard or have a really good reason why you would have separate daughter boards. That the way the Steam Deck is built, though, is rated as being much easier to repair than the Switch 2. Yeah, and speaking of internal, someone asked me if the Steam Deck, now that it's like 3 or 4 years old, the LCD version is, if the internal components in that are going to last very long compared to the Switch 2, which is really a ignorance, I would say, to what you're really comparing it to, because the Switch 2's hardware is effectively 4 years old, so even a Steam Deck LCD computer hardware has way more possibilities as far as playing games in general, because it can just run way more games and play a lot older games, but its actual hardware is better than what a Switch 2 will be. And that's why even emulation of a Switch 1 game on a Steam Deck seems to work perfectly well, from what I hear. So yeah, I don't expect that I don't think that what you're going to have as far as the custom APU in a Switch 2 to be much more than a Zen 3. You'll be lucky if it's a Zen 4, and I suspect it'll be at most Zen 3 RDNA 3, and those are the two branding labels to really look out for. And yes, if you made a new Steam Deck tomorrow, it might be a Zen 5 with RDNA 4 built into it, and it would be a super powerful device. It might also be a $2,000 device, at which point I'm not sure how many people are willing to buy a handheld for the price of a laptop, particularly right now in this economy. And more realistically, the Steam Deck was designed to be cheaper, so still would be a step up if they made a budget Steam Deck 2 that was a Zen 3 with RDNA 3 in it, and that may be more than enough power to fix any small problems that AAA games might have as far as frame rates. And that's really what it's all going to get you, is that in better hardware is really just going to get you better frame rates. It's not going to be the difference between does it crash or does it not crash, or does it launch or does it not launch. It's just going to be, does it run smoothly or not? And most things run smoothly. Once you start to potentially try and push up to higher resolutions, then you need more power. But the Steam Deck is also uniquely designed and the Switches too, to not multitask. Although weirdly, the Switch 2 is introducing some multitasking with the chat features being built in, and the Steam client also allows for chat. But both devices are really designed to be unitaskers. So compared to a computer, which might be doing a lot more in the background or running more programs at the same time, they're not really being asked to do the same kind of workload that you might do on a computer, where you might have an email client working in the background and maybe even video rendering, or in my case as a content creator, OBS running in the background, recording things, running effects occasionally and stuff like that. Siege, Rainbow Six Siege is 66% positive in the last 30 days. Yeah. And yeah, as we look at the top charts here today of games being played on the Steam Deck, and I feel like I definitely am a true believer in the Steam Deck and the concept of the Steam Deck. And if another device not made by Valve came out that was cheaper or better than the Steam Deck, I'd probably jump over to that, but I've yet to see something that was both cheaper and better. I've only seen things that are more expensive and maybe better, or maybe cheaper but not better. Mostly it's been more expensive but and better. But yeah, I feel like I've become really an evangelist here, but this chart certainly shows what people are playing on the Steam Deck. And when you have things like the Elden Ring Night Rain and Clair Obscur being played on the Steam Deck, it speaks to that audience not really missing out in any ways. Again, it's probably worth pointing out that Borderlands 2 is on this chart because the game was given away for a few days. One of the games that I saw was off my wish list and not available for purchase was Out of the Park Baseball 2025. I looked into it and I'm like, why would a game labeled 2025 not be available for purchase? And they've already announced and released Out of the Park Baseball 2026. So that they're a year ahead, effectively. Persona 5 Royale perhaps is being played a little bit more to it with the enthusiasm around the Persona 4 remake announcement. Which, yeah, okay. Resident Evil 4 might be getting played. Honestly, getting Resident Evil 4 at 50% off might be a decent deal. But, yeah. I don't think I would be engaging with that deal at the moment. Yeah, Resident Evil Village for $9 might be a pretty good deal. A better deal. Resident Evil 2 might be a good deal. That being said, it is also worth pointing out that a lot of these Resident Evil games are somewhat deceptive in their pricing, because if you're going to get all the DLC and the real experience, it's going to bump the price back up. Death Stranding Director's Cut, obviously being played in anticipation of the sequel. So yeah, to get the Director's Cut version of the game is $40 right now. It's the Director's Cut update for people who had already purchased Death Stranding, that is $9. You get Resident Evil 2 in standard versions is $9, but if you wanted to get the deluxe edition, it would be $12. And if you wanted to get the mostly negative Resident Evil Resistance included in that, you can spend $14, and this would also include Resident Evil 3. But again, not the deluxe editions on that. So when they really want all of the extra content, you're back up to $40. Yeah, $9. It's been on sale for $9.99 like 27 times since June 4th. No, with the latest being right now. So yeah, the deluxe edition is at $12.49. Not a terrible price. It is worth pointing out though that a lot of these deluxe items are cosmetic things, costumes, and silliness like that. So you're paying a good $3 for gimmicks. Not a ton of money there, but certainly something to think about. Yeah, Resident Evil 2 in particular just feels like the weirdest point, in that Resident Evil 2 is just much more of a remake and much more modern of a remake than the most recent Resident Evil 1 game remake release. And then one of those games was auto-curated. That was probably Village. And then, let's see, the gold edition of Resident Evil 4 is still $30. Yeah. They don't have a bundle here for Village at all. They're not really trying to tie the Resident Evil 4 remake to the newer, canonically, storyline wise, games. Alright, well, that's more than enough warm up. Let's go through the Video Games Chronicles headlines. But yeah, I guess that's what I'm doing, really, is I'm going through the headlines of articles, much like you might see happen on a late night talk show. I guess I probably did watch a lot of late night talk shows. At one point in my life I was kind of big into that, so yeah, I've seen a decent amount of Conan O'Brien, more than you would probably guess, of Johnny Carson, although those very possibly may have been rerun, which late night reruns of Johnny Carson, which would be a little weird. So I guess I do have a bit of an experience there, although it would be a very narrow influence, in that whether it's probably being done on the Daily Show, which I didn't watch really any of that, evolved what late night shows were a lot. And so, like, never watched David Letterman or Jay Leno or Craig Ferguson or what is it, the one named Daily. So their styles probably wouldn't influence me much. And the headline aspect of the late nights are not all that they were doing. That's an interesting thought. If you tried to make a late night show about video games, you certainly could do jokes, you certainly could do headlines, but could you really do interviews? And could you really do promotions? Not consistently, unless you are huge, and at a certain point that you are just going backwards instead of having a podcast, which can do all of those same things anyways. first headline says, June's PlayStation Plus game catalogs games include FBC Firebreak and Battlefield 2044, and 9 more games will be available to PS Plus Premium and extra members next week. And let's see the full list here. It's actually readable. FBC Firebreak and the rest of these, none of which are catching my eye too much, except for Deus Ex The Conspiracy. Which, what is Deus Ex The Conspiracy? Is that the first Deus Ex game? Can't click on it, so I'd have to search it. Let's see, search Steam for Deus Ex The Conspiracy. Nope. That didn't open anything up. Let's see if we'll... What I really want to add is just search Wikipedia. A lot of times I do just want to go to I guess that is the first game. Okay. It's a port of the original Deus Ex for PS2. It mostly consists of the same dialogue and area layouts as the PC version, aside from a few minor changes the layout of Liberty Island. This was due to the fact that the PS2 version had smaller section maps compared to the PC counterpart. This game also uses higher... Just click on it and not just read the synopsis. So yeah, they're giving you a PlayStation 2 specific version of Deus Ex, where the PC version yeah. Game also uses higher resolution character models with lower resolution textures. Generally, the game runs more poorly than the PC version, especially during high-octane fights. The controls were entirely retooled to work with the limited amount of buttons of the PS2 controller. However, the game is compatible with a USB mouse and keyboard, with controls very similar to the original PC release. So they're saying the PC version is better. Interesting. It's interesting that that's what they're releasing as far as the version goes. Moving on, a new Jumping Flash game was in development for PlayStation VR. The PS1 cult classic was released 30 years ago. I know there's a line in the song, Jumping Jack Flash, which may have influenced the name there. May have made also a problem. I don't recognize Jumping Flash though, so I have no idea what it is. My guess is it is a robotic frog of some sort. I don't know how that would play into a game at all though. Which I guess again, it's always a new day and a new opportunity to learn something. So we should just go here. And it basically is almost never the case that I want to go anywhere else than Steam or Wikipedia, so I need to just add that as a right click thing. I don't know how to do that, but I'm fairly certain there is a way. Okay, so it's one of these early 3D experiences. Say first person perspective game. The game follows a robotic rabbit named Robit as he searches for missing jet pods scattered by the game's atmosphere. Antagonistic character Baron Aloha. Robert must explore each section of the crater planet to retrieve all the jet pods, stop Aloha, and save his world from being destroyed. Game was designed as a technology demonstration for the PlayStation console. Interesting. There is a game that I played, actually 2 games that I've played, that is almost exactly the same experience. The only difference is, I guess, you're not jumping as much as you are climbing, particularly in the early gameplay. And one, I believe, was called Go Home, and I think the sequel may have been Go Up, or maybe it was called Go Up, or then Go Home, or it might have been Grow Up or Grow Home. Oh, yeah. I think it was Grow Home was the first of the games, and then Grow Up was the second game. And instead of having an antagonistic character, you had this AI computer and you were a little robot, and the computer had an acronym of MOM and treated you like a child and was effectively the robot's mom. So interesting. So this 1996 game was just not kept or utilized, and so the concept was effectively allowed to be parodied or stolen. Let's see. See if we can. Yeah, I have it set so I can't really search directly into Steam, and it still went to Wikipedia in that case. So yeah, Go Home came out in 2015, so even that was 10 years ago, and had a very similar concept, although it probably did a lot more than Jumping Jack did. Yeah. Now, where's the sequel to it? But yeah, first one was called Grow Home, and then second game was called Grow Up. And frankly, by the second game, you were basically just doing the same thing you'd done in the first game, so it was probably a good move that they didn't try to make a third game. This was in 2016. Honestly, if they had waited longer amounts of time, it probably could have been this longer running series of games that would have made a lot of sense. But yeah, it was basically the exact same game with basically the same controls and same visuals, and there was no new gimmick or new concept really in Grow Up. There's nothing really wrong with the game, it's just that sometimes too much of the same thing is not a good thing. And that's probably a great example of where a lot of times these influences just don't really matter. Like the fact that I had never heard of Jumping Flash almost certainly made the experience better when playing Grow Home, because I thought it was more of a unique concept, and had I learned that Jumping Flash existed and for some reason it was available to actually play on Steam, I probably would have just struggled and played Jumping Flash and irritated myself playing it before playing Grow Home, which probably would have bled in to my experience with Grow Home and made it worse. But yeah, the fact that a game was in development from Sony is not particularly surprising, because there's, I think, a lot of games that have been canceled, particularly VR games. And yeah, I bet that would have been a nightmare trying to play that in VR. That seems like something that would almost certainly cause a lot of motion sickness. Apparently Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 plus 4 includes Tony Hawk's Underground's villain. Calls for Tony Hawk's Underground remake have been growing for some time. Eric Sparrow apparently is a villain. Why do you really need a villain in a skating game? I don't know. I could see an antagonist, but do you need a true villain? Or has the meaning of villain just been watered down so much? Like, a villain should be someone who is vile, thus vil in the name, I would guess. Whereas an antagonist might just be a friendly competitor, and in a skating game that would make a lot of sense. Like, I don't want a villain in a skating game who is like tripping you, breaking legs of your friends, calling the cops on you, things like that. Unless you're gonna really waste a lot of budget writing a good story there, which probably would be a waste. But in a Gary to Ash in Pokemon competitor, where they are rivals but not villainous to each other really. I don't think Gary ever cheated or did anything really awful to Ash. And a lot of times the antagonist might just be another competitor, or it might even be a romantic interest, as far as here's somebody who is determined to beat you, and through the process of trying to beat you they gain respect with you and then eventually fall in love with you because they have so much passion there. Which, yeah, I guess as far as characters and stories in video games, the passion is often missing in any way you use passion. And honestly, I'm not expecting too much passion in a skating game, but there could be a little bit more in almost any game. Let's see. Mind's Eye Studio scrambles to fix glitches as user review criticizes the GTA producer's latest game, I guess. Seemingly no outlets received review code for the Build a Rocket Boys debut game. There's also accusations by somebody using bots to attack the game, which is probably an attempt at astroturfing. But I did hear one YouTuber saying that Mind's Eye plays poorly and is very single path designed. It's trying to kind of advertise itself like it's a open world game, but it really isn't. It's more just, it's a very scripted experience where you have to go from point A to point B. So yeah, there's definitely a lack of polish, it seems, but also there's, I think, a lack of promotion for this game and a lack of real interest in this game. This definitely feels like a game that is being shoved out there instead of a game that could have found its right time, advertised itself, and then over the course of the next year found a good point to be released. But yeah, probably needed more polish overall too, because I'm suspecting it is a case where there isn't a intriguing gameplay mechanic at all in the process either. So there is just no real reason why people might come back to it or continue to play it. In a funny way, this guy's just being unable to really point a gun at you. It usually is the case that you have a situation where games are over advertised. They have these lying trailers, or they have some dramatic story attached to them to keep people intrigued with it over a longer hype cycle and announcement cycle. This is supposed to show stuttering. Apparently. Frankly, watching this on Twitter, though, video, it's hard to really see the stuttering. It does seem like when the camera moves, there's some stuttering, and certainly it's very ambitious trying to have cars in any game. Yeah, you can see there's a long list of trailers or videos being shown here, all negative. Let's see. Moving on, Capcom says it considers Switch 2's controversial game key card titles as digital sales. The digital keys in the box have attracted criticism per preservationists. Capcom saying that almost seems like that's just something they would say to their shareholders as far as how we're going to do our accounting, which perhaps is them manipulating their accounting to imply that physical sales are not wanted. But I think it would be fairly crazy for anybody to believe that the intention is not there to eventually lie to shareholders and say we're going 100% digital, and to force end users to go 100% digital whether they want to or not. Particularly a Japanese company who has much less rural customers, in the sense that they won't really lose that many sales if somebody in the boondocks of Japan doesn't buy one copy of a Nintendo game or any game from Capcom just because they don't have good internet or don't want to buy it digitally for one reason or the other. Whereas in the United States, there's a lot more rural locations, and as such, there are going to be less sales and a lot more unhappy people. This is a terrible screenshot. On my monitor, which has the graphics really blown out and frankly just is not very good, all I'm seeing on this is the black, the white, and then this red here is blending in with the red here, which I can see on my third monitor, which is blending in with the red here. So all I'm seeing is just a big ball of red on this screen, and it is bright red, whereas it is a deeper crimson on my third screen, which maybe I've just poorly calibrated my monitor, although the monitor I'm looking at it on is also the oldest of my monitors. If they are going to give, I said this in the last stream, if they are going to give us codes in boxes, at a certain point I think you just get rid of the boxes and then you just have little cardboard things, almost like gift cards. And really it should just be a gift card situation where you take a gift card from a wall to the cash register, you pay for it, and as you pay for it, the code at that point becomes activated, and only before that, only at that point is it activated. And at a certain point, it almost seems like the code should just be printed on the receipt, and then the cardboard should just be put back on the wall, or the gift card should be put back on the wall. I know people want something physical though, so if it was just a cardboard that had like the ability to be stood up on a shelf and showed a nice little picture, and then it doesn't have to have any of the ESRB ratings and any of the Nintendo branding, that would be fairly attractive. As far as here is just a little poster board that's small, like the size of a Blu-ray case, but way thinner and way more disposable and recyclable. No more plastic cases. Yeah. In contrast to what you're really getting, which is, here's 3 examples of Japanese code in-box games, where the top half of it is just Nintendo Switch branding in still a plastic thin Blu-ray case. Bottom half is all of the Sero Japanese age ratings, and then you have the logo from the publishers showing up on the screen, and you have the logo for the games themselves. So it's not particularly interesting art. And yeah, once they go fully digital, I think you're going to find that the art is just going to become cheaper and cheaper, and it is only a matter of time before people are going to start doing AI art just for the game covers, just because they don't want to pay an artist for the small amount of time it would take an artist to make a single picture like this. That was certainly another thing as I was cleaning up my wish list, as I ran into a couple of games that had AI generated stuff in it. And yeah, I eventually realized I don't want to cover or promote anything with AI generated art in it, or AI generated music, or AI generated text. So anything AI generated is just not something I want to promote or play, because I want actual art to be made by actual humans, and at least until you can prove that humans are being housed and fed and treated well, and that AI can actually do as good of a job as your average creator does, human creator, which will be probably a long time before that could happen. The Switch 2 version helps Street Fighter 6 reach a major sales milestone. Street Fighter 6 is now the second best selling entry ever. Interesting. Be interesting certainly if there was a Street Fighter generation that rose up from this, and fighting games were all of a sudden popular because of Switch 2. I didn't think Street Fighter 6 was doing particularly great. Probably better than Street Fighter 5 did. Sony's Bin Studio has been hit with massive layoffs after a live service game was cancelled. Almost a third of the company has been reportedly let go. Yep. Nintendo Switch 2 has sold 3.5 million in 4 days, likely the biggest console launch ever. They certainly seems like they had a lot of stock available, and so by overstocking, perhaps to avoid tariffs, they have had bigger sales in the first 4 days. Now, here's where I'm going to be a negative Nancy and say that 3.45 million may very well balance out with the next 4 days to be a much smaller console launch than you would expect, just because yeah, I still am not hearing a lot of enthusiasm around the Switch 2. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people bought it thinking it might sell out, and that got the numbers higher. It is also worth pointing out that the highest console Nintendo sales are the Switch and Switch 2 at the moment, because those two consoles are effectively taking all the enthusiasm that would have been split between something like the 3DS and the GameCube. So once Nintendo fanboydom was merged between your home console and your mobile consoles, yeah, your sales are going to double, and that enthusiasm is going to double because there's one device now instead of two. So the metrics get skewed heavily when you start to think about pre-Switch sales, as there was a Game Boy like device also always available and coming out for sale. Let's see. The Splitgate 2 boss apologizes for a summer game fest stunt. We needed something to grab attention, is the quote here. 1047 Games CEO Ian Prolix says his MAGA style hat was a marketing stunt. No duh. I saw a Reddit post saying that this announcement, which I didn't pay enough attention to even see it, was basically a speed run on why you should not buy his game. And here you can see he has like one of those smart rings and putting his thumb up too while wearing the hat. But yeah, it wasn't just the MAGA style hats that people are upset about, although people certainly were upset about that. Also was what the game was actually advertising. Yeah, and that is not a good way to get positive attention, and I think the thought that there's no such thing as bad news is out the window at this point. And so now he's trying to backtrack, and I think the backtrack and the excuse here may very well also still just be gaslighting, in the sense that he's trying to shift the focus around the dumb hat while not really addressing complaints with the core ways in which that game is going to Splitgate 2 is going to come out. In fairness, I also saw a thing on Reddit saying that Jagex also has canceled like an LGBTQ event that it had been doing in previous years, either in-game or out, I don't know. And so people on Reddit are upset with Jagex also. So these kinds of things seem to be the kinds of things that happen more frequently than I would like. Embracer is going to replace the CEO who oversaw the turbulent acquisition spree and massive layoffs. Lars Wingfors will be replaced as CEO, which yeah, I don't know what they were thinking. It would be an interesting interview, certainly, to see as far as like, what were you thinking? What did you really just think that you were some kind of tech startup company that was going to get angel investors giving you money forever? Because inherently the acquisition spree wasn't 100% wrong. Him acquiring companies to build up Embracer and make it be a big company quick is not 100% wrong as an idea. The biggest problem though was he acquired all these companies, and the companies either weren't anywhere close to releasing a product or weren't getting motivated in any way to release a product. So in the 4 to 8 years after they started acquiring things, They just weren't churning out products at all. There were no tentpole products to hold up the tent for the acquisition of smaller companies. And certainly it could have been done at a slower pace and more focused and more interested. It's almost like he thought that by acquiring a company they could live off the profits of old games that company may have made, and it usually doesn't work that way. And then yeah, you just kind of compound the error, and I don't know how you don't compound the error when you just start having massive layoffs. THQ Nordic was what Embracer was called before, and then Embracer was the parent company really that was created for THQ Nordic. But before then it was called Nordic Games, and Nordic Games was the remnants of Tokyo headquarters THQ, who went bankrupt for a similar over expenditure in a drawing tablet for the Wii that sold very poorly right about when Toys R Us was going out of business. So there's always just been, I think, this history of overspending and wanting to own a bunch of IP for not really a good reason. Noticeably, they also have failed to monetize the IP in any other way too. That I don't think a single Embracer IP has been turned into a movie or a mobile game or a TV show, something else that you could perhaps license to it. I think they acquired Gearbox and sold them before Gearbox really did anything at all. Perhaps the reason why the CEO is getting replaced over anything is because he's changed his style of running the business. Had he just pounded the desk and said, acquisitions, 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 we must continue acquiring companies, we must continue to build, this is all going to pay off and hit big eventually. Had he just kept on doubling down, he might have been able to stay around if he can convince other people to believe that, and that's probably how he stayed around as long as he did. But yeah, perhaps one of the most forward-facing bad CEOs we've seen in the game industry, which is almost certainly nearly 100% bad CEOs as far as overspending and not creating an industry that is going to work in the long run. And by long run, I mean let's see actual people on average make it to retirement age in the game industry and not be laid off. Like, the video game industry in a lot of ways is going to need to be a lot more like the union good days of the auto industry, where you're just going to have these kind of factory jobs of making games, and you're going to work in that same position and that same title as a game developer, game programmer, game animator, and you're going to have a seniority based pay grade, and so the longer you're there, you're going to get paid a little bit more, but you're going to have a lot more job security. So you're going to work at a game company, make as many games as you can in your career, which really is only going to be maybe 8 to 10, and then you're going to hit a retirement age, retire, possibly get a pension. That's what the games industry needs to look like, unless we just want to introduce like universal basic income, and then game development can not be a job at all, it could just be a hobby, which at that point that might make some sense too. But the churn and burn style in which the game industry is run now, in which people are getting hired out of college, getting paid almost nothing, and then developing one game, and then the game selling less than $1 billion, so big people are getting laid off, usually the older People with more experience and talent and knowledge are getting laid off first, so there is a brain drain, and then your company is left with just a bunch of college kids that actually don't know how to make a good game because they don't have the experience, and maybe they know the technicality of how to program a game, but they just don't have the experience on what gamers actually like and respond to. I'll leave it at that. Video Games Chronicle, again, is a UK-based focused website, so Switch was the UK's biggest Nintendo launch, but sales didn't come close to the PS5. Switch 2 in the is the UK's fourth biggest console launch, according to data. Let's see. This is Nielsen IQ data. Seems like they could have put that in the headline. Published by the Game Business. Yeah. I could see that there might be a lot more enthusiasm around the PS5, plus when the PS5 came out, the economy was in a better shape. But yeah, there was definitely a lot more games that were compatible and potentially worth considering playing on the PS5. And by a lot more, I mean maybe 4 instead of 1 during the launch day there, because there was probably a Last of Us 1 and 2 on the PS5 day 1. There was probably Spider-Man and Spider-Man Miles Morales. There was probably a Tomb Raider game or 2 that you might want to play. Horizon Zero Dawn and Horizon. So yeah, but there was at least 6 games that would give you a better experience, even if they weren't brand new games on the PS5. Whereas the better experience on the Switch, as what I've seen from people, is that the games run closer to 60 frames per second now if they're a Switch 1 game. They're a little bit better in the frame rates, but almost imperceptibly better in many cases. One of the YouTubers who has had a Switch 2 for a week and is already disappointed with it is upset that the triggers aren't analog triggers, in the sense that it can't register whether you've pulled the trigger a little bit down versus all the way down. And he was a little upset with the cases and the way the cases work, as far as how it lays out the buttons on the Joy-Cons. He just doesn't think that the Joy-Con layout is particularly good. I'm looking forward to somebody figuring out a way to have something like Joy-Con like devices on a handheld that somehow fold away and make a flatter, more pocketable handheld. I don't know how that would really work, but it is an interesting idea, certainly, because the center of most handhelds are, with the exception of the new Xbox handheld that was announced, rather thin square devices that feel like if you had really big pockets you could slide that into a pocket and walk around, which is not perhaps something you really would want to do, but you want to put it in some kind of carrying case, and you want to be feeling like you aren't carrying a very large woman's clutch or purse with that carrying case. And so flattening some kind of origami-like device that could flatten the controllers down would be an intriguing thought, certainly. You could certainly have cutouts on the back of a square device where the Joy-Cons, or some kind of Joy-Con-like device, snapped into the back for storage, and then there would just be basically no circuit boards on the insides of the case of the square screen part on the back side of the screen where the component snapped in. Although if you're going to start to have it snap in that way, it almost feels like you could do something where, like the analog sticks, which are the most prominent parts of a controller, I wish there was a better picture here to show this, as I'm thinking out loud. But yeah, if the Joy-Cons rotated 90 degrees and snapped into a thin spot or slid into a thin spot on the back side of the screen of a Nintendo, then the analog sticks would be the part that would be sticking up, and they'd probably be sticking up a little bit less. So you could potentially have a storage of a flat plane where the analog sticks are almost acting like bumpers so that the screen, if face down, wouldn't get scratched. But then overall, it might take a little less space. That's an interesting thought. And maybe you could flip the Joy-Cons the other way, and then the thumbsticks might act as like little kickstands, so you could always have a kickstand. And maybe there would be some like gameplay reason where if you're just playing with two analog sticks, you don't need any buttons. Buttons themselves can be pressed in. Fine. And at certain points you could have unscrewable thumbsticks, which wouldn't be the worst thought ever. As far as you flip it down while pushing a button, maybe it would flip down sideways and take up less space, or you screw it off and don't use it at all, or snap it into a different place. Yeah, I guess there's all kinds of design here. I'm just kind of rambling as I think about it, but yeah, clearly the point here is that there is room for improvement on handhelds as far as how much space they're going to take up. But weirdly, I don't think it's ever going to get to the point where you can just make a super thin cell phone candy bar type design, where, what was it? Smartphone square design. I don't know if that's really what you'd call candy bar design, because you are going to need buttons until we have a point where we can like have replicators generate buttons out of thin air, analog sticks and buttons and things like that. I hadn't heard this one. Splatoon Raiders has been revealed for Nintendo Switch 2, the first Splatoon spin-off revealed alongside a Splatoon 3 update. Is this some kind of Fortnite clone? I wonder. Let's see. That would be my question. In the role of a mechanic, players will go on an adventure in a mysterious spiral light islands alongside the Spectacular Deep Cut trio. So yeah, not a lot of description there as far as what the actual game is going to be. With the name Raiders, it doesn't really sound like a Fortnite clone. This kind of looks like a almost Lego game. So it seems like what you might be doing is you're going to an area and then you're going to loot some item and then run away from that item, run away with that item. And it might very well be a team versus team scenario where you're raiding locations. Although that visual there looked more like you're playing a game like Raft, which is more of a survival game. Which, yeah, raiding and survival games are different. So yeah, that trailer's not really telling me anything at all. I would say the majority of what is being shown there is a Raft survival type game. And this video is long. It's like 5 minutes. Yeah. And see, there's, I think, 2 products here. One called Deep Cut and one called Splatoon Raiders. they're saying it's an exclusive thing, which is no surprise there. So the thing here, though, I think is you're gonna, in the actual gameplay, either have a single player experience, or you're gonna have a very weird multiplayer experience where you're cramming in the Splatoon gameplay style and the paint and the Squid Kids concept. This is Splatoon 3 that they're showing right here, and this is, yeah. So half of this video, it stopped talking about Splatoon Raiders here, and then it's now just talking about Splatoon 3, so this is exactly what I would kind of expect from Splatoon 3. And at a certain level, I guess Splatoon 3 has found a way to be a competitor to something like make a competitor to Fortnite that feels a little more kid-friendly and is doing something a little bit more creative, in my opinion, than what Fortnite is doing. That being said, I imagine most kids still want to play Fortnite a lot more than they want to play Splatoon. Yeah, Splatoon is a weird game with the Squid Kid aspect to it, though. Like, I can't help but wonder that if Microsoft, for instance, or even Apple, tried to make a game like Splatoon or a game like Fortnite that was just more kid-friendly and didn't have the weird Squid Kids aspect to it, that might have a chance of succeeding. A small chance, since all those games have really a small chance. Alright, well, it took me nearly 2 hours to get to this point, and I'm going to take my first bathroom break, so I'm going to pause the recording and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. That was a shorter break. Alright, let's now go through the Gematsu articles. So, Poppy Playtime Chapter 4 is coming to the PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series, and Switch on June 25th. It's currently available on PC. And the Gematsu articles auto open all links to Steam now through JavaScript. So we can see that Chapter 4 here is mixed reviewed. I am noticing that there were several games on my wish list that had chapters that had, like Bindi in particular, is a game very similar in visuals to this Poppy game. But Bindi had like a chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, and at some point they just recontextualized everything and made it one complete game, which, in fairness, the episodic concept around video games never really made sense. Not even when Telltale was succeeding the best at that did it really make sense, or keep Telltale from going out of business in any way. What is weird, though, is that there's just a real lack of redirects on Steam, which would be fairly easy to do. Is that you would have your 404 error type page return a redirect when you had something that has been delisted from Steam and replaced with something else, and it's just not the case. So often you'll see like demos taken down that should just sneakily redirect to the main game in that case. And maybe they just want some historical consistency there, but as a storefront goes, like a bait and switch type redirect on a URL seems almost necessary. Although in fairness, I also kind of, there might be some legal issues there since it is a storefront, and I see similar things on Amazon.com where there are certain products that when they go out of sale, you can find products that look like they're exactly the same products from a different seller that are not on that same seller's page, which in the case of Amazon.com is actually a good thing because there is so much rampant fraud, or at least there used to be, of people putting different products on their competitor's seller's page and then selling a knockoff on the page that was also selling the original. Maybe they found a way to mostly crack down on that. I don't think they really did, though. Resident Evil Requiem is playable in first and third person. I heard someone say that the first person gameplay was not well received in Japan, whereas I think it might have been somewhat well received in the 1 or 2 games that used it in the rest of the world in the West. I can't help but immediately wonder if there is perhaps a level of sexism that they're trying to overshoot, since it seems like you're going to be playing as a female protagonist for at least a significant amount of the gameplay. But I've also heard rumors and speculation that actually this is somewhat of a bait and switch thing too, and you're going to have like Chris Redfield or one of the other known male protagonists from the previous Resident Evil games show up and be a character. Horror in particular, I think, will work better with female protagonists, and has worked better in the past with female protagonists than action first person, third person shooting games have. So there is perhaps a hint here that they are going to have more horror in this experience and less action. But yeah, we really don't know anything at all about the game. This trailer is basically a fake out until about halfway through that it even is a Resident Evil game. And so halfway through this whole experience, you're not even supposed to recognize this character. And I don't think you're really supposed to recognize this character at all until he just says Grace at that point. And so I think the name Grace is supposed to make people recognize her. But yeah, when you see a sequence like this where she's tied up, it does imply that somebody else might be involved. And then there's a point here where this guy may be just a return of a bad guy, the main bad guy for the early Resident Evil games. And he calls her Miss Ashcroft, so her name is Grace Ashcroft, so at that point maybe you're supposed to recognize it. There's even like a question here if it isn't going to be a case where it's got a fairly large like survival open world in a bombed out Raccoon City. There's the 9 that pops in for a second. So yeah, this is the big news, as it were, as far as probably the biggest game. Gamatsu also has the PlayStation Plus catalog and classics lineup for June, which they format things slightly different, perhaps slightly better. The legendary Hoplite, or Hoplet, I'd say that's legendary Hoplet, is now available for PS4 and 5, Xbox One and Series and Switch. It's currently also available for PC. And this is the game that felt like it was inspired by the Might and Magic game that's not part of Heroes of Might and Magic. Forget the name of that game. I like that game, and it's on Steam too, so it kind of makes less sense. And honestly, this game may actually play way different than that game that I'm thinking of. Yeah, if anything, actually, it seems like this does play fairly differently from the game I'm thinking of. That might explain why it's not being compared to the game I'm thinking of too. And then the review says completely falls off shortly after chapter 2, where it turns into a repetitive grindathon. There's no strategy here, it's just gear checks and repeating levels until the game designed to give you the actual level of loot you need to continue. The game claim of minimal grinding is just an outright lie, most blatant, when every now and then a level will experience a sudden level increase. Stay away, literally any tower defense game is better than this. Well, that's a shame, but perhaps not as big of a loss as I thought it might be, because from the face of it, it looked like a very different game than what I think it actually is. Now, let's see if maybe we can watch a trailer and get a general idea. Yeah. In the Might and Magic game I'm thinking of, you would have troops, and then you would stack them in groups of 3, or sometimes you stack them in squares, and either a horizontal 3 or a vertical 3 would have the troops strengthen themselves or attack themselves, attack better. And so it was this real strategy turn-based game experience. This looks like you're really controlling this main protagonist a lot more, and you are really just using a shield line as a tower defense type experience. Music that's playing here is some heavy metal rock and roll type music, but there's nothing being said in this trailer at all. Obviously, I've already taken this off my follow list. I'm pretty sure I've seen this before, but I want to keep things checked. Like, there really is a point here where the checks may never go away, or they may go away like in 2026. I might start thinking about getting rid of things that have been checked in 2025. May not really matter, although a lot of these checks, since these are local storage cookies, new technology, new style of cookies for web pages, may not come over to my next computer build whenever I get around to that. Let's see. Death Stranding 2 on the beach, explore, connect, and survive trailer. It's probably worth watching this just to get a general idea of what the gameplay is actually going to be. Rated M for partial nudity there. Hopefully we don't get any of that in the trailer. Yeah, the audio here is telling Sam to move the chiral network to the south, and that was basically this thing he was creating, and as far as a path, and that's somehow going to save the world. But yeah, this definitely looks like this is just more of the same from the first game. Although it seems to me like seems like it's the exact same gameplay style. No real surprise there. Yeah. As I'm watching this, one of the things as I'm trying to declutter and clean my house is that I still have this weird situation where I have too much stuff, and so I'm basically going to have to clean and organize a room to dump a bunch of stuff into that room to clean and organize a different room. And I'm not sure it ever is actually going to lead to a actual finished product or finally clean house in this case. And there's lots of opportunities to get ambitious and move things around. Like one of my rooms has a closet that I could turn into an office. That would be like a quieter, more recording studio, but the closet is attached to such a large room, and I'd have a hard time just justifying using that room for what little stuff I have that I really want to have. Yeah. It would be very minimalistic. It would just be a much larger open floor plan than I would think. Or I have another room that's too small, and I could squeeze into that room, but then it would be a tight squeeze and probably not worth it too much. The room is probably better off as an office than it is a bedroom slash computer recording room. Alright, so as you can tell, I'm kind of rambling there, and I'm not particularly interested in Death Stranding 2, and I'm less interested now having watched the trailer than I was before, because I had some thought that maybe there would have been a completely different gimmick, or that there had been some kind of modernization improvement on the thought of the gimmick for Death Stranding 2, but it probably is doing the right thing by giving you what you would expect from a sequel. The question certainly will be how many people are going to be willing to go back and play Death Stranding 2 and having already played Death Stranding 1. In my mind, Death Stranding as a series probably is going to be one of these games that would do very well for having an abridged version where it just shows you the cutscenes and speeds you through to boss rushes and boss fights, and gives you the best content and leaves a lot of the other content, a lot of the grind on the cutting room floor. Alternavelt, I'm gonna say Alternavelt Blue Exorcist, another story for iOS and Android, launches June 25th. So it's a mobile game. And certainly at this point, I think it is a case where you have no extra chance, I won't say less chance, but no extra chance of success because the game has an anime tied to it. Which I think Blue Exorcist is a anime. It might just be that this is a spin-off mobile game of another game. Seeing a lot of characters here. Yeah. Not really seeing anything particularly interesting there, though. Trails of the Sky, first chapter character trailer, Joshua Bright. If you want to check that out on Gamatsu. This game we saw on May 8th. And so this is one of those games that's going to take a while to come out, and they're going to just put out a whole bunch of trailers. And yes, first chapter is a reimagining of the beginning of the game series, which probably makes a lot of sense, frankly, that some really old games could use remakes slash reimaginings. Maybe by saying reimagining, you open yourself up to less criticism when you start to make changes. I could definitely see a reimagining of, say, Elder Scrolls Arena, the first Elder Scrolls game, as something almost completely different than what it is, to try and get a new audience. Yeah. In a lot of ways, you could probably have a reimagining of Elder Scrolls Arena and then put in a lot of backstory and setup for just understanding what Elder Scrolls are and what the whole story and narrative is of that world. Let's see, we have the Famitsu review score for issue 1902, if I can read correctly. So, Rydo Remastered and more have been scored. And thank goodness, because this might be the last time I have to say Rydo and not feel awkward about it being pronounced exactly the same way as my own name, even though I spell my made-up spelling of Rydo completely different, R-Y-D-O. So, Hungry Meme for the Switch was given a low 30 out of 40. Natsumi's Book of Friends, Hazuki no Shirushi, was given an even lower 27 out of 40. And then Rydo Remastered The Mystery of the Soulless Army was given an average 33 out of 40. I believe this is yet another game that is technically in the Shin Megami Tensei universe. I think it is. It's another spin-off game. So there's quite a lot in the Shin Megami Tensei universe. More than most people, I imagine, recognize or would care to play. Komatsu also has the Switch 2 sales topping 3.5 million, probably from the same data source as everyone else. Street Fighter 6's sales topping 5 million. This is an odd artistic style for Street Fighter 6. Let's see. I guess Street Fighter 6 is just being received pretty well. I find that a little surprising. Was it always that way? Am I misremembering things and just confusing it with Street Fighter 5? Show me the graph. Well, according to its launch, it always has been pretty positive. Interesting. There is a decent amount of negativity at the beginning, and there's a decent amount of people reviewing it overall, so you get some negativity overall. But yeah, that's still mostly positive. Very positive. It's funny, 84% here is labeled as very positive. 74% here is mostly positive, because there's, I guess, just less people. I don't know how they are really doing their math. I think mostly positive is above very positive. Maybe I don't understand what they mean by very positive versus mostly, because yeah, mostly is a kind of wiggle word. It can mean a lot of different ways. I could see interpreting mostly as like it's mostly positive in that it's at 51%, or you could say it's mostly positive in that most of the reviews are positive. So I guess I don't understand the definition or know if there is a consistent definition of mostly in English. Probably isn't consistent. It probably is the case where you can say the same words, and depending on the emphasis of how it's spoken, it can mean two different things. I had a dumb project I made at one time, or made the foundations of making. I didn't really get too far into it as far as making a language that would have been much more concise around what the words mean and easier to break down what the words mean, even if you didn't immediately know, but also had a level of ambiguity to it where there is some words in how you'd pronounce words. They would mean you're ambiguous. In some ways you would pronounce it where it would mean you are speaking exactly. So the way it broke down is that you would have always something that would be like a consonant and something that was like a vowel. And so the consonant would indicate what you're talking about in general amongst certain classes, and then the vowel would be the equivalent of, like, A means you're talking about exactly one, B means you're talking about more than one but less than half, not B, but A, E, as far as vowels go, would mean more than one but less than half. I would be the equivalent of you're talking about exactly half. O means you're talking about more than half but less than all. And then U would mean you're talking about all of them, whatever that thing is. And so, yeah, that's just kind of a rough translation of what it really would be if I'd put more effort into it. But yeah, so if, for instance, the consonant B, I'm really rambling here, meant like a tall thing, so saying ba, B-A, means you're talking about one tall thing, where saying B, B-E, means you're talking about more than one tall thing but less than half of the tall things in the room or in the situation that you're discussing. And then O, A-E-I, I would be by, B-I, and that would mean you're talking about half of the tall things in the situation in the room. And then O, Bo, would mean you're talking about more than half but not all of the tall things of a certain type. And then Bu would be Boo, you're talking about all the tall things of a certain type. Now, does that make a lot of sense as far as a functionalized, programmed language, something that nobody would ever adopt and would have to be taught at the point of a gun, frankly, to people for it to be adopted? No, that's incredibly simplistic wording, which was the whole point. That's how you would teach a baby to talk. And then what you would do is you'd have another pair of a consonant and vowel, always a consonant first, always a vowel second, to give more details. So then it becomes like German, where you can have these constructed words that just get longer and longer. So if you said the tall thing that is next a animal by starting with, say, a X, then you can give further details and generally, in constructing the word, describe what thing you're talking about. So a tall thing that's an animal that also next has the property of being also fat, all of a sudden you're talking about maybe a dog then. And so yeah, you can just continuously add details, and if it's easy enough to be subtle and not construct a word to be longer, you just don't. You just go, hey, that tall thing there, when talking about a human. But if you need to be super precise, you just construct like German to go further and further. And eventually there would just be kind of like a standard dictionary of words that have been constructed, and a system in the order in which you construct words would be established, where there would be a word that is spoken that is commonly known to mean that specific type of thing, whether it's a human or a dog or a like automobiles, things like that. But yeah, much like Esperanto, the language that tried to combine 3 different languages, I believe, together and be the language of all humanity, it would never get adopted, unfortunately. We are probably closer to the idea of aliens landing and forcing us to learn their language, if anything, or closer to the idea of having chips in our brain that just auto-translate languages. I suppose if we had chips in our brain that taught us languages, though, if AI was just in charge of everything, the computers themselves may create a language and teach us binary to speak and think in. Anyways, none of that has anything to do with video games. I'm off topic today. Yeah, seems like sometimes I'm sleepy and tired and a little down and I get off topic, and then sometimes I'm a little bit upper and high energy and I still get off topic. So the only thing consistent is that I get off topic. Moving on, Class of Heroes 3 Remastered launches September 18th. Remastered Dungeon RPG gets a release. There's another language I had heard about more recently that is perhaps even better than Esperanto as far as a thought of constructed languages or languages that people should be speaking. There's a YouTuber that talks about that language every now and then. In general, he always talks about languages. But yeah. It's practically impossible to quickly change a language or change how languages work because of just the rigidity of older people to literally be physically incapable of learning new things. Their brains have locked in and gone on auto mode. So this is just a dungeon crawler game. Definitely not particularly interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more remasters of dungeon crawler games, but I would be really surprised if any of them are relevant or would be something I would ever want to play or need to play. 15 years wait from the second game to the third game, probably because they couldn't get funding. Let's see, Splatoon Raiders announced for Switch 2 with Splatoon 3 version 10.0.0 update launching June 12th. Leave it at that. Trails in the Sky first chapter character trailer for Estelle Bright. Also, so another character being shown. And in this case, we know that the link would have opened to the exact same page on Steam, but because I have a plugin that says don't open duplicate links, or actually it lets them open them but then immediately closes them as far as duplicate tabs go, there was no link to this page until I just clicked it, which in that case I also just opened a duplicate tab, so that means that the previous tab has probably been closed at this point. So I need to now leave this open to make a YouTube short around it if I was going to make a YouTube short on it. But I'm not, so I'm going to just close this tab. Which that's a long way of saying nothing. Never Awake Flashback launches this fall for PC as a standalone game. It's no longer downloadable content for Never Awake. Yeah, it definitely seems like you get a weird case where usually it goes the other way, where some side content just becomes part of the main game. Don't know specifically what Never Awake is. Let's look at its Steam page. It's a twin stick shooter based on a nightmare world of Never Awake. Which I'd have to assume that Never Awake itself is a different type of game. So let's go ahead and search this. See what Never Awake is. Let's see. Well, Never Awake is also a twin stick shooter. Flashback. I remember this game with the weird visuals. Barely relevant for something that was released in 2022. Only 134 reviews, but getting past my requirements. 95% positive at 134 reviews. And there is definitely a lot of games on Steam like this where they have their small audience, which may be in the thousands, but 1,000 sales of a $20 game is $20,000. That's not enough to run a business or really even pay a single person for a full year's worth of work, but it is some amount of money. It's something that anybody would gladly accept if offered. Clash of Heroes, that was the name of the Might and Magic game I was thinking of. Yes, Might and Magic Clash of Heroes was what I thought that other game was called. Now, this game is called Class, not Clash of Heroes. 1, 2, 3 Remaster Collection announced for the PS5 and Switch, and it is very much a different game. Apparently it is not available on PC. I'm not seeing any Steam links anywhere. I don't recognize this game at all, so it's due out September 18th in Japan. It may have never and may never come to the West. Alright, and we have the Gaming on Linux articles for the first time in a long time in the right position, so we can now just go through Gaming on Linux. Let's see. Supply chain issues are making the Steam Deck OLED go out of stock. Valve have put up a notice on US and Canada where multiple models of the Steam Deck OLED have gone completely out of stock. It's going to be a little while before they're back too. There's been a lot of regional issues, plenty of which is thanks to the Trump administration's ongoing tariff fight. Multiple hardware vendors have faced the same problem, with some putting their prices up. Currently the US and Canada, the 512 and 1 terabyte OLEDs are now out of stock. At least the prices shouldn't go up, is what they're saying. So inherently, I think Valve is really just deciding to say, hey, we'd rather not sell any units than admit that we're going to raise the price, which is what may have to happen. Now, is there possibly some sneaky way they could raise the price and sell it while not overall affecting the price? I mean, they could probably sell units through like eBay or something like that, some other storefront at a higher price. But it seems like what they're doing is they're just holding off, and they're just not going to not bake in tariff things. Although inherently they could also update their website to just include tariff taxes, so you would get to the page, you would click a buy now at $5.99, and then as you're going through the checkout process, they would say you will now be charged $5.99 plus a tariff fee of an extra $100 to $200, which is what a lot of storefronts are threatening to do, certainly in the United States, is that they're going to highlight the tariffs and not eat the cost, and make it very prominent and obvious that the prices are going up during the checkout price, just because of tariffs. Moving on, Terra Tech Legion could be the best survivor-like ever with a vehicle building. Okay. I've seen a few of these like vehicle building simulator games, and I don't know if they've ever really interested me. They obviously pop up now and then, so somebody thinks the Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts concept should be brought back. Craftings refreshes the classic Lemming games with mini city building. Interesting. Though I question, is that really a Lemmings game at that point? Or is it just a game that has Lemming-like characters who are wandering around? Yeah, the way I see it, a Lemmings game is characters trying to get from point A to point B, and then some characters being able to be assigned specific abilities, such as exploding, to get through any bricks that would be blocking their path from A to B. Also, I kind of don't think the Lemmings game are particularly good, so if it's changed for the better, that's probably better. You can chill out and breed fish, and we love fish tanks. Yep. Still too many games, in my opinion, presented from Gaming on Linux, although in fairness, he either covers games that are really new before I see them myself, or he just somehow finds games that I'm missing, which I don't know how I'm missing any games at all when I'm trying my best to look at almost every single game except for the adult ones. Gunstoppable looks to be just the right amount of first-person shooter insanity. Let's see. Yeah. Nexus Mods has a new app. Nexus Mods' new app gets more UI improvements, performance upgrades, and a Linux fix. Yeah. I'm not particularly super interested in Nexus Mods apps at the moment, but inherently on my Steam Deck, since I am really just using it as a testing bed, I install a whole bunch of programs just to see what the experience almost is like, which weirdly also puts me in a situation where my setup and the settings and things on my Steam Deck are way different than what a fresh install would be. In fact, I just set up the dev environment to build programs and put it in more of a developer mode, because I want to compile a few programs and see how that works on Arch Linux, which is different certainly from how you do it in Debian based systems. Home Assistant, speaking of Linux, but it's not video game related, also is dropping support for 2 out of its 4 different ways in which you install it, although they're dropping the 2 least used ways of using Home Assistant. But then Home Assistant also has added some newer integrations as far as serving up images via Home Assistant and better native integration with Alexa devices. Moving on, Gen 2 Rescue is a puzzle game with twists that will melt your mind that I'm too stupid for. Okay. Gen 2 is another name of a Linux operating system. I don't know if Gen 2 stands for anything though. Probably Generation 2 if I was to guess. This intrigues me, and I guess this is the first game I will put on default list. You can catch rocks and rockets to throw at your enemies in Galactic Glitch. Okay. We may have like every single article from this showing up from Gaming on Linux just being a promotion of games. There may not be any more technical Linux news. Spooky 2D co-op submarine sim called Barotrauma is getting a big home and harbor expansion. Okay. This game is fairly old, so getting an expansion is not a terrible thought. Not a terrible reason to make more YouTube shorts, which I haven't actually run my YouTube shorts, so I need to get back to that and get the text-to-speech working pretty soon too. At Fate's End is next month's is the next game from the Spiritfarer team. Stabbed right in the neck, it seems, or magically being pulled out of the neck. Usually it's magically being pulled out of the chest or stomach. I kind of like the art style, but the gameplay looks like it might be all over the place. These are all very different screenshots, so it's hard to really tell what it's about. Let's see. Manjaro KDE Plasma plans to move to Wayland by default. Everything is going to move to Wayland by default. Ubuntu is also making some big changes that they're not referencing here. The question is at what point those to change. I think Ubuntu 50 is going to make some big changes as far as the version goes. Oh, and I suppose, well, it's not Linux related, it's also worth pointing out that Apple put out a bunch of announcements and improvements on how they're changing their operating systems, and one of the biggest changes is probably going to be that they are moving to an annualized naming convention, and that their version of iOS is going to be iOS 26 for 2026, and then 27 for 2027, and so on and so on. Whereas naming, numbering conventions tend to stay somewhat consistent. This is not particularly different, just on the face of it, from the Steam Desktop mode, which makes all the sense in the world since the Steam Desktop mode is also KDE Plasma. Hopefully the move is done. When the move is done, it goes smoothly, is always the hope. So Wayland is hard to explain, but it's the desktop compositor. It's the middle software that decides how to draw the windows on the screen. And it is a replacement for X11, which has been around for decades and very long in the tooth software. So with moving to Wayland, there's a hope that once it does get fully adopted, and it'll be improved upon even more, and it will certainly eventually just have a lot more options and functionality for particularly rendering gaming windows and improving just how games in more performant apps really perform. Whereas X11 really it's just so old. It's designed to show file browsers and notepad apps and maybe web page browsers at most. It's not designed for people to have hundreds of different apps open on a screen, or a game that's just going to be pushing pixels and textures. So yeah, just a lot of modernization is hopefully going to happen with Wayland. It would be kind of crazy, certainly, if it was a if some other software compositor other than Wayland showed up and became the new hotness. And I guess I was wrong about it being Ubuntu 50. Ubuntu 25.10 is going to go all in with Wayland, dropping support for GNOME on the Xorg, which, yeah, I guess GNOME is the compositor. Is that really the right comparison? I thought X11 would have been what Ubuntu is using. Xorg X11. Wayland is the future, and the more distributions that force it by default, the quicker Linux can move on and continue improving. 25.10 is the last interim release before the next long-term support, with Ubuntu 26.04. Next year, this move makes sense. It means they can smoothen any rough edges by the time the long-term support version is. Still not really recommended to use Ubuntu though, in my opinion. It's kind of just still a little dying operating system choice. I just don't know why you would pick Ubuntu at this point. There's better options. The massive Satisfactory 1.1 update is out now with controller support, which I can see where controller support might be helpful, but I am surprised to even see Satisfactory on my wish list, since there really hasn't been anything. And I guess at a certain point, I thought I was going to go through every single game on my wish list and then just like check the checkboxes, but now that I think about it, it's better to leave things on the wish list with the checks as they are, and then if for some reason, if a game gets an update, make a new YouTube short and then let it automatically check at that point, and then that'll be the latest point at which I have looked at the game. See, Gaming on Linux says the base building co-op exploration game Necessis hits 1.0 in October. I'm not sure if I pronounced that. Necessi? This definitely doesn't look like one of those games though that I would be interested in. So this has already been checked though, so I don't think I really would want to make another YouTube short on it. Direct3D to Vulkan Layer DXVK 2.6.2 has been released. This is Direct3D being an API from Windows, so you're converting the API from Windows applications to the Linux API Vulkan, translating it, meaning continued work is happening to make Windows apps just work on Linux. Which, yeah, it is a level of craziness certainly, but it is the only way to maintain compatibility and keep things working, because we know that game developers, even now with the amount of success the Steam Deck has had and SteamOS has had, developers are just not willing to spend the extra time. Publishers aren't willing to fund the development of Linux apps, native Linux apps. Dune Awakening is out now and works well on Linux desktop, but it is rough on the Steam Deck. Probably doesn't have controller support to a level you would expect or want. Yeah, just looking at this, it does seem like there's kind of a lot going on in the game. I guess check out this article if you want the full details on gamingonlinux.com. Dune is probably not a game I'd want to play. I think it's a MMO anyways, so yeah. Certainly, I don't think would be my type of game. The Steam Beta has improved controller support for the 8BitDo Ultimate 2 wireless, 8BitDo Pro 2, and more. Let's see what else have they improved support for. I still am kind of kicking myself. I got an 8BitDo cheap and then put it in my hand and realized it was just like way too small for my hands. It's probably a pretty decent controller. It is also worth pointing out though that the 8BitDos are likely not going to be restocking in the United States, so they may just go out of business. Extended buttons options showing up. One thing the Steam Deck really is pushing secretly in the shadows is the idea of just an L4 and R4 trigger buttons on the back panel, which honestly I don't think there will ever be a point where I could play a game where I have my pointer finger on L1 and right R1, my middle finger on L2 and R2, my ring finger on L3 and right R3, and then my pinky fingers on L4 and R4. Well, I could probably struggle to get all of those fingers to be in that position. The chances of me actually being able to pull anything with my ring finger and pinky fingers are almost zero. In fact, I probably would struggle to even pull any triggers with my middle fingers. Like, usually it's one or the other, with a decent gap in time between when you actually are required to hit one or the other as far as L1 and L2. And yeah, controllers need to evolve in some other way other than just giving buttons on fingers that I just don't have the skill to use. I don't know exactly how they're going to evolve, but they need to think of something quick. And I guess that was linking to some game from Gaming on Linux that was curated away, and I wonder if that's Dune Awakening. Is there a tag on this that would have curated it away? Not seeing anything. Not seeing sexual content, nudity, or anything like that. I don't know what other game would have been open there. Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade would have been it. Stellar Blade gets Steam Deck verified ahead of its release. Well, that's interesting. In a funny way, I think Stellar Blade might be a decent game to play on the Switch. The controllers might help a little bit there, and the graphics would look worse, certainly, but there is perhaps a argument that the grindy aspects of Stellar Blade in the long run might benefit. And this is not the initial trailer of Stellar Blade. You certainly would be missing out, though, certainly as far as the visuals and the frames if you're playing it on the Steam Deck. But the truth here is that you really would rather more gamers be able to play the game with a Steam Deck, and that's really what the Steam Deck is offering is, hey, how do we convert people who have been playing either on a Switch only or a Xbox or PlayStation to PC gaming in a cheap and easy way. And that's where the Steam Deck, I think, shines. And sure, eventually Steam Deck users might find that they can install SteamOS on a custom-built $2,000, $3,000 computer, and they can raise the resolutions up to 8K and show you a much prettier experience, but that's almost like that's your revisit to AAA games. Like, expect to do that in a decade or so, which is somewhat of the experience that I'm having. Certainly, is that a lot of games have been remastered, and playing them on PC has given you slightly better visuals and experience, and just smoother experiences compared to playing games originally on like the Xbox 360 or earlier consoles. And weirdly, for the future generations with like Nintendo 64 decompilation efforts, you can potentially just recompile games to run better than they ever ran. Although I'm not sure if we're going to see decompile efforts for like Super NES or NES games. I don't know if that would really benefit you too much. At some point, Super Mario Brothers being recompiled would probably run just as good as Super Mario Brothers runs on emulation now. Moving on to GameDeveloper.com, it looks like we have 4 stories, which I'm shocked to even see that many. There's a report that Veilguard's late pivot from live service spelled doom for the Dragon Age sequel sales. Pivoting from a single-player game to a live service multiplayer and then back again led to 9 years of development on Dragon Age the Veilguard. Oh yeah, that seems very believable. And all they're saying is it's a report, so it's basically a rumor at this point. But yeah, 9 years to release a game that should have come out probably in 4 or 5, shifting from single player development to live services almost certainly because EA told them to and forced them to, and then back is crazy. It's just a crazy way to do things. Let's see, Lethal Learnings from Hitman prepared IOI for making 007 First Light. IOI's chief technical officer explains why Bond goes further than Hitman with the agency fantasy. Agency, do they mean Hitman agency, or do they mean the idea of just being an agent of something, which at a certain point the Hitman and James Bond are just hitmans or assassins. Which is kind of funny how in the James Bond movies they gloss over that his core skill set and what he's assigned to do is find something or do something, but his sub objectives are almost always find and kill some people. Let's see, Sony is making layoffs at the Days Gone developer Bend Studio, which I feel like we had talked about that already. It's been reported that 40 workers have lost their jobs in the first-party studio. While Sony has confirmed those numbers, it has confirmed the cuts. Switch 2 tops 3.5 million sales to deliver Nintendo's biggest console launch. Embracer CEO Lars Wingfors is going to be the executive chair and focus exclusively on mergers and acquisitions, which is hardly replacing him and kicking him to the curb, which is what I thought they were doing. But no, it seems like they are somewhat doubling down. Although, in fairness, his passion clearly was mergers and acquisitions, and perhaps with a new CEO to put some other vision in other ways in which Embracer might at some point become a good company. Maybe he can just focus on mergers and acquisitions. I really have to ask the question though, what was the point of all these mergers and acquisitions? Was it literally just a effort to own a bunch of IP and lay off a bunch of talented game developers? Because that's all it seems like it is accomplished in Embracer. It's all it seems it's accomplished in Microsoft. It's all it seems like it's accomplished anywhere. Meanwhile, a lot of those people who have been laid off have just gone and formed their own companies and are now new competitors you wouldn't have had you just not laid people off and had not blown the budget on mergers and acquisitions. Let's see, a Switch 2 exclusive Splatoon spinoff was just shadow announced on Nintendo Today. You've Gotta Be Squidding Me is kind of a funny subheadline there. And then SAG-AFTRA has reached a tentative agreement with major studios that includes AI guardrails. The Performer Union has been on strike for almost a year in a bid to secure better working conditions and AI protections for members plying their trade in the video game industry. Yeah. Some contract negotiations go fast, but a lot of them go really long. So as far as union contract negotiations, particularly first-time contract negotiations, it is not uncommon for them to drag on for a year or longer. It may very well be the case that the negotiation team that was hired to represent the major video game companies were paid a year in advance to negotiate, and literally were creating a situation where the negotiations would just go on for as long as they were being paid, and then the major studios decided we don't want to pay another year with these negotiators, so they told them to just agree to certain terms. Or it may even be that the major studios said we're not going to agree to anything until a year has happened, and we're just going to try and wait them out. Noticeably, it's worth pointing out that this says WB Games in a blurry text here. The Warner Brothers and Discovery have just announced that they are going to split up, unless that was a fake news article I just saw. Which, yeah, the breaking up of Discovery and Warner Brothers once again, which I believe both are owned by AT&T, so they may very well be shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic as it sinks. Might have also affected these negotiations somewhat. Warner Brothers Games in particular, though, I think is already in shambles, and it's unlikely we're going to see much coming out of Warner Brothers Games or any of its other video game subsidiaries. Like, one thinks they might be always working on another Batman game, and one would think that Telltale is always working on another Lego game, but honestly they might be working on a kids game or a non-kids game even that doesn't include Legos, because yeah, it seems like we're getting Lego games developed by other people more frequently these days, which is going to really hurt Warner Brothers Games in particular, TT Games in particular, because they spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to recreate the Star Wars, latest Lego Star Wars game using the Unreal Engine. So now they've learned how to make Lego games in the Unreal Engine instead of their own proprietary engine, although maybe that was just a stepping stone so that they could make something different with the Unreal Engine. Alright, let's look at all the new games on Steam now. We'll see how fast we can go through that, and with any luck we will be done fairly quickly. I'm noticing quite a list here of kind of ugly games to start with. It may be the case that there was less interest in putting out any amazingly good looking games while the Summer Games Fest was happening, and this may just be the aftermath of that thought. Now, this is one of the things I am noticing, is that some of these, as they were reloading, decided I was not logged in. So, yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, there was also a lot of free visual novels that I've added to my library. I'm not suspecting I'm going to actually play them, but yeah, I'm really just doing my best to spread the problem of too much amongst both my library, my wish list, my fall list, and the check marks that I have added. 2048 x 2048. And then there's definitely some styles of games that were on the fall list that I still don't think I found quite that style. Here's a great example. I would love a game where you're shooting guns at targets, and I don't really care about if you are shooting guns at birds or not instead of clay pigeons, since they're all virtual. Then this problem happens that it's a VR game, and there were a couple of games like this on the fall list that just were not reviewed well, and in those cases they would have had to have been really reviewed poorly. Yeah, I know definitely there were some example games that were on the fall list that are now not on the fall list, and so the hope is that I want to give this a chance. Yeah, it doesn't look like anything. And yeah. Yeah. I don't know why it would have logged me out of some, but it basically, I think, may have been Steam thinking there was too many accesses at once. We have a mostly negative one. That may have been one that was made using VR content. If I was to randomly guess. Yeah, I do think we're going to see an increasing group of people who will play either free games just to negatively review them, or even buy and refund games to negatively review them if they have AI disclosures. But yes, at the moment I can't really abide the thought of anybody using AI. Of course, in fairness, the second I tried to make a game, I would be extremely tempted to say, hey, I need an AI music creation and I need an AI artist, because I can't afford to pay a real musician or an artist. And I'm getting just really low rent. Tower Defense Games. Is it all by Rawi Studio? Yes, it is. And see, this is a great example of what I've been saying for at least a year now, in that Steam Direct should limit the number of games to 1 a month for going through Steam Direct, and any publisher that needs to put more than 1 game out per month would have to just renegotiate a better deal than Steam Direct has to prevent that kind of nonsense. Just asset flipping the exact same game 5 times in a row at the exact same point. Like, why not at the very least stagger it? It is crazy, to say the least, to do something like that. Here we can see Mind's Eye is 40% positive. And apparently I've already made a YouTube short on it. So I guess I just leave the check mark and move on. At that point, I'm not going to make another YouTube short around it. I do kind of hate that even starting at like 8 p.m. in the evening, these streams go late in the evening, and there's just, although in fairness, I never really do get anything done after these streams. And I probably am getting more accomplished before these streams on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when I do stream. So I think I've probably found the best system of possible systems. But yeah, here we have yet another Space Marine game that is negatively reviewed. This Warhammer 40k game was just removed. The original Warhammer 40k game was removed and they've replaced it with this. There is a whole bunch of DLC also removed from my wish list. I had like all the DLC there. But yeah, you can see it is not being received well. I don't think the original game was received well. And I imagine that is why a lot of games are missing from Steam. Also is because there is single player option here. Yes, I know somebody that likes to play Farkle, so I don't think it's particularly a great game, but it's fine. It's a dice game where you keep on rolling dice to increase your score, but if you can't increase your score, then you lose your turn. So it is a game very much about assessing the boldness of your players around you and then being lucky and gambling, and that's about it. There's a little bit of strategy as far as locking in your score, but if you have all 5 dice scoring, or I think like a 1 and a 3 gives you some points too, on top of 2 in a row, or 2 of a kind, 3 of a kind, or straights and things like that. But if you have all 5 dice or all 6 dice scoring, then you can re-roll all 6 dice again, and the score carries over. Yeah, it's very much a gambling and luck-based experience, which, like most dice game, is actually a good thing because dice games in particular tend to be designed for newer players, people that don't really want to think or use strategy. It definitely is the case where a dice game, compared to other kinds of tabletop games, is probably going to be a little bit more friendly to younger audiences too, because you can just read the pips and count the pips. So if you can count to 6, probably fine in a dice game, whereas cards might have words on them and or concepts that make it more complicated. The potential options on a dice are 6 numbers, assuming it's a 6-sided dice, whereas the potential options in a 52 card deck might be 52 options if you're separating each suit to do something different, which most don't, or 13 options if you're doing all 13 cards from the 4 suits. Or 12 options. Yeah, I think it's 12 options actually. 12, 24. 24 and 24 would be 48. No, it's gotta be 13. 13, 26, 26, and 26 would be 52. Yeah, I was right the first time. I'm doubting myself. And yeah, tarot cards, even though people think of them as being used for fortune telling, were not originally created for that and weren't used for that for basically decades, if not hundreds of years. They were designed to be extra cards and extra suits for playing cards. And so if you're playing with just the major arcana of the tarot cards, you're adding, I think, at least 27 cards. Yeah, I'd have to, let's see if I can count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and then another 16 cards at least, maybe a little bit, maybe 17. Well, we know Death is the 13th card as far as the major arcana, but also if you're including the minor arcana in tarot cards, then you have what is more than a 52 card deck, because it adds a extra suit in the Knight card. So there's a Knight, there's a Jack, there's a Queen and a King card, as well as Ace through 10, I believe. So it gives you a lot more options that can be used to make up other card games. Which, boy, was that a pastime in the old days, which makes a lot of sense. You wouldn't have had video games, so making up your own custom card game would have been a thing that people would have done quite a bit. And then there's also a very interesting split between card games becoming popular in the West and tile games becoming popular in the East. Probably because paper manufacturing a little bit more prominent in the West in the old days, and probably a little bit to do with just the lifestyles of people in the West in the old days. So during the British Empire, for instance, the people who would have parlors to play parlor games in would be inside out of the rain of England, whereas around that same time, people in Asia would be out and about working farms and getting rained on quite a bit. So it's a natural evolution, just because of the weather of all things, that mahjong tiles, which really represent the same concepts that a card could make, became much more popular, because mahjong tiles getting rained on do not ruin them, whereas the luxury of the English aristocrats playing card games was a way of them showing off and being outside of the rain. I imagine there's a lot of history like that too. And dice games would have been originally carved, in particular, out of bone or ivory. So dice games probably are more prominent in the cultures of more Asian countries and African countries, I would suspect, where large bones of animals would be much more common. But yeah, dice games have been around, I know, for at least pre-Egyptian times, Mesopotamian times, I think. And I wish somebody really would have taught in school. I imagine kids would have been very excited about taking a class about the history of games. And here's the most recognizable old tarot designs being shown. Yeah, just going into like a historical surprise, we're teaching you history here class, but it's around video games, would have still excited me quite a bit, just to learn it as somebody who wanted to be a video game developer, and that pivoted at some point into me becoming best I could do as a video game critic, which still being informed about games is very helpful in that, being a critic. Alright, well, that's the end of the show. So as always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.